Don't know.
Okay, just keep recording these because I know there's people that are really keen on this and they appears like they might not get in, so at least I'll be able to send them the recording. So in summary, just to let you know where I'd got to, actually, no, might just introduce everybody, seeing we don't all know each other. I'm the only person that knows everybody here. So Dennis, do you want to start and introduce yourself?
Thanks. Yes, Dennis Enright. I've got a company called New Zealand Biochar Limited. I began my working career with 23 years working in fertiliser and soil research for AgResearch. The next 20 years, I did a whole range of things and got heavily involved in organics. And the last 10 years, since 2008, I've been studying and working with biochar.
Excellent. G'day, Ben. We can see that you're there and you've got your sound off.
There we go. Hello.
Hello. We're just going around and introducing ourselves. So I might introduce myself because you all know who I am is not important, and there may be other people coming in. So I work for New Zealand Landcare Trust, which is a non-for-profit organisation that was created about 20 years ago by a whole lot of people that were concerned that there was not somebody working independently to help any landowners that wanted help with meeting environmental goals. So that's what I do. I get paid 3 days a week to work with the landowners. I have to deliver 5 events, but apart from that, I'm left alone to just help people where they need help, basically. So that's what I do. And my background is agriculture, agricultural science, and I've worked on sheep and beef farms. So I'm very landowner or farmer orientated. That's pretty much me. Mike.
My background started with DSIR, which morphed into crop and food research, which is now plant and food. Worked for Agriculture Canada. Big background in horticultural research, mainly around my trainings around running field trials. Did that specialist training at Lincoln, statistics and all that sort of thing. Lots of different crops, lots of different situations. More laterally worked for the fertilizer industry and signed off on all that sustainable nutrient management, postgraduate stuff and that sort of thing. So soils and nutrients are a bit of a strength for me now. And also I work for a consulting company called Fruition, and my role there is training, certain amount of consulting and specialist projects, but I sort of take care of all the research projects that we're involved in. They all come over my desk. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
And you're local, Mike?
I am in Motueka, yep.
Yep. Dan, do you want to let fly with you and your company?
Yeah. So my background is about 16 years of organic viticulture through a conventional system, but managing organically, not certified, but just in principle. Last 3 years have been managing outdoor production for Waimea nurseries. 1.5 million apple trees a year, 350 hectare production, and now, or more recently, crop operations manager for JSUs. So overseeing all our market garden production on the plains. So next Marlborough, North Canterbury, and now Nelson for the last 10 years. So, yeah.
Excellent. And Ben.
Yeah, hello. So Ben Conning, we've got our, much like down at yours, market gardeners here on the plains. My background, I'm a civil engineer, but got roped into the family business. So, but yeah, side all the sales and staff and whatnot here. I don't so much have so much to do with the growing side of things, but I definitely will pass on. I have enough involvement to understand biochar and its benefits and whatnot. So yeah, interested to see what needs to be said or has to be said.
Yep, and Ben, before you came in, Dennis just introduced himself. So he just might like to do that just quickly again, Dennis.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Gina. We met.
I met you,
in,
Dennis. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So I just had a bit of ag research, 20 years in ag research with soil and fertilizer, and then organics. And now over the last 10 years, I've been studying and trying to promote biochar.
Excellent. So the reason for this was that we had this little group that started after we had a national webinar on biochar. In the event, what role could biochar play in Tasman? And we just found out that Nelson Pines has this product, and that's what Dennis is selling on their behalf. But at the previous meeting, they also indicated that they would be keen to be involved in trials. And so our conclusion was to try and find, a researcher and some growers that might be interested in looking at some trials. So I've actually found 4 growers. We've got 2 of them here. And I should have had that open. Yeah, so Northwood Hops are potentially also interested, and Julian Rain is also in Hops, sent his apology. He was interested in finding out about it. And I've just talked to a guy on Lansdowne Road who specialises in fermenting foods and things. He would be very interested in composting biochar and augmenting it with the proper mycorrhizal fungi and things, and making sure it's a nice balanced high quality fertilizer. I just had contacted Tallies. Dennis, this is for you because we were talking about Tallies. Apparently Tallies doesn't compost any of their waste, but they produce liquid fish fertilizer and they produce fish meal, but that fish meal is sold as fish sources. So for those of you who, the biochar is quite the process in producing it, and it's also quite the process in working out the best way to add it to the soils. So one of the ways it can be added to the soil is via augmented composting. And when you compost stuff, you reduce methane, and the biochar reduces the production of the methane. And it holds all the cations in there, and it can be a slow release fertilizer. It can also be added directly to the soil and incorporated into the soil, and then it becomes a cation binding site which will hold ammonium ions and other cations. It increases the water holding capacity of the soil. And this product comes with an ash component, so it does actually have a nutritive component itself, which Dan, I don't know if you've seen, but others would have seen that material that we put through. So I just thought we would start with a Q&A about the product, really with Dennis. So Dennis is the one that knows most about the product. So I'm sure Dan and Ben and Mike, you've got questions you want to ask. So just go ahead and I'll take some notes.
Yeah, can I start, Dennis? Just I come from a background, I can understand some of the benefits of biochar, but I've never been that interested in it because of, to me, the energy to make it. But now, in this case where it's a byproduct, it really gets my interest. So some of my questions are in ignorance. What is the physical process of increasing soil water capacity with biochar? Because it's really soil water holding capacity is really around soil texture, structure, and macro and micro pores, with the macro pores, increasing drainage, and the micro pores holding the water. So how does biochar fit into that mechanism?
Well, effectively, as you're probably aware, it's got a high porosity, and although you might only be putting relatively a small volume into the soil, it has that benefit. And by keeping nutrients, etc., along with a microbial habitat, then even with cultivation, it definitely has the ability to improve aggregation. It may not be structure as we know it in a pasture, but it certainly has the ability to improve aggregation. Sorry.
Yeah. So excuse me. So in the normal situation now, we get aggregates are formed and held together by organic matter and other all sorts of plant exudates and things, which are glue, which hold the aggregates together and create the pore spaces and everything. So it's not chemically or physically affect. The water holding capacity is within its own unit. It's not affecting these other particles in any way, helping binding aggregates together or anything like that.
I don't, well, there's a certain number of sort of chemical sites that might operate to an extent in that area, but my understanding is that it's associated more with the water and the microbial activity, and ultimately by additional roots and other organic matter that comes through from the crop. So I know that at one stage people were talking about the native peoples, original peoples involved in the terra preta soil, saying that it grew. Well, it has been shown, like it grew in volume, that seems to come back. Well, some of that will be a little bit myth, but there is definitely, it's been shown that it actually can lead to increased sort of native organic matter alongside. And I couldn't quite get my head around that, but when you give consideration to the fact that if you've got a healthier and more dynamic soil, then you presumably get greater root growth and microbial activity and all those types of things, and that would lead to that. Now, under intensive agriculture is obviously very difficult to do that and really see the benefit. But I know that very large potato and onion grower and Pukekohe, who's been using biochar, but in addition, I have to say, I'm not quite, he would say it's the biochar, but he's also been using at times the sort of composted wood waste. But he has shown that his runoff of silt from the sides of his slopes is much less compared to his neighbours. He's gone on TV and said it. He'll say it to anybody that fronts up and asks him. So, but this is over a period of time, and probably 2 or 3 tonnes per hectare over 5 years or so. So if you've got that additional binding, then you're going to get additional water holding. And he'll also state that he starts his irrigation on paddocks that have had this type of treatment later than his neighbours. So yeah.
Does he?
Sorry.
Does he have a method of soil moisture monitoring?
No, but he's been in the business. Well, that I can't say definitively. He possibly does, but no, I can't say that he does. I don't know for certain. The chances are he may actually.
There was some work that Bernard Simmons did for the council, did look at nitrate leaching on the Waimea soils, and the higher the organic matter, the less nitrate leaching was coming out the bottom. So, if it does help organic matter, then it should.
And that's the point. The biochar, certain ions, it doesn't hold to any great extent, but when you've got the overall change in the soil, as you're alluding to, Annette, in terms of more fine root growth and that organic matter, then the overall picture improves and leads to these other outcomes.
Mm.
Do you see application having a direct effect on the cation exchange capacity? Can you see it in the soil tests, the CEC increasing?
Sorry, it was a bit muffled. Can you just repeat that?
Do you see after biochar application a direct increase in the soil cation exchange capacity, the CECs?
Not necessarily, no.
Right.
No, again, I would go back and agree with Annette in the sense that there is a certain variability. One thing is known that over time, the cation exchange capacity, as the biochar ages, it does tend to increase in its cation exchange capacity. But if you're measuring that in the soil, then it becomes quite muted in terms of the whole picture, the whole soil picture. But no, if you were just to do a soil CEC, I think you'd be struggling at the early stages, at least, to see the difference.
Right.
Have you got an ideal rate, a feeling for ideal rate, Dennis? I was reading in one of those papers that I sent to Annette the other day, I think it was in one study, they found that 5 tonnes per hectare was better than 10 tonnes, if I remember it correctly.
Yes, I think from they've done various meta-analyses and other sort of studies, but in the early days, there were some very high rates put on. One thing that seems to be reasonably competent, rates over 10 tonnes don't give any benefit agriculturally anyway. And I suspect that times 5 might be equal. I don't know that it should be better than 10 tonnes. But again, I think a couple of tonnes or less, 1 or 2 tonnes, it may seem like a spit in the bucket, but just as part of an annual process, I think is probably the way forward, really.
1 or 2 tonnes over, it's stable, so it's not going away. So you could only do that for so long, surely, putting 1 or 2 tonnes on per year. You couldn't do it forever.
No, absolutely not. But I think the practical cost maybe, but equally, I think the soil's better to have that going in rather than saying going in at 10 tonnes and applying it. It may well work okay, but I think that in general, going in over a period of time, and you're quite right, assuming that there's no sort of loss through flooding and that type of activity, it accumulates and will be there largely forever. There's a very small portion, something of good biochar, there's a very small portion that is available to bugs, and they can consume that at the disadvantage of the soil. If you're on a sort of a cusp for nitrogen, you get a bit of microbial growth, and that could actually lead to a bit of a deficit at that time. But in small rates and with a soil with reasonable nutrient value, that shouldn't occur, and it would be temporary anyway. So that's a benefit. The other thing about that I need to mention is that the Nelson Pines high carbon boiler ash is only 33% carbon. So in terms of if you're working with the nutrients that you're applying on the ash, the rates of that will probably dictate that you shouldn't really apply it more than 1 or 2 tonnes anyway, depending on what your other fertilizer regime might be.
Yeah, so it does actually come with quite a lot of other nutrients, and I sort of worked it out, didn't I, at the last thing. So this is a question for Dan and Ben. So I worked out the various tons that would be coming in and the rates of nutrients. So, for instance, the kilograms of nutrients coming in per hectare. So I'll just randomly pick something. So for broccoli, the N is 45 and P is 7 and potassium is 67. When you look at, say, 2 tonne, there would be 80 kilograms of potassium. Obviously, there's no nitrogen comes in with this. 10 kilos of P and 4 kilos of S. And when I was talking to the guy from the hops, he said that at certain times of the year, they like to have potassium coming in for his hops, but other times of the year not. So they all seem to fit the sort of requirements of the crops at that sort of 1 to 2, that 2 tonne mark without causing too much problems. But that could be a little bit of a tricky component.
I think I agree. I think it's something that needs to be sort of worked through with a little bit of caution. And the other thing you've mentioned, Annette, is the liming equivalents, which I don't have on that material, and I have sent a sample off. It'll only be a snapshot, but both the biochar or the charcoal component, but also the ash component will contribute to a liming amount or equivalence. So need to get a really good handle on what the soil that it's going on to. Well, you guys will have a good handle on your soil, but need to match what the material is with what your soil and your program is.
Yeah, which is we're just having Philip Wilson from Nelson Pines joining us.
And definitely liming equivalent for us is something we would have to manage carefully. We tend to run quite a fine line on our pH for controlling root disease and brassica.
Okay. Yep. I think like generically it might be something like 50%, but that's just sort of a guess out of the literature rather than the actual value of it.
Yeah.
That's what ash is anyway.
Yeah.
Philip and what's it?
Dion.
Dion, you just want to quickly introduce yourself to the rest of the people in the meeting?
Hi, sorry we're late. Philip Wilson from Nelson Pine Industries. I'm the technical manager here.
And I'm Dion, I'm the environmental advisor here at Nelson Pine, and Dennis and Ben. There you go.
Okay, so clearly know Ben and Mike, you just want to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Mike Nelson. So I'm a consultant / researcher over here in Motueka. We work throughout throughout the South Island. All sorts of different projects and crops. I have a background in research and soils and nutrition, plant nutrition.
Yeah, and Dan?
Dan Manood, outdoor crop operations manager for JSUs. So just oversee all of our outdoor production.
Yeah. And we've got a hop farmer that's interested and potentially a guy that makes compost that would produce a fermented mycorrhizal enhanced balanced compost. If he could get hold of the organic material, that he would make it up in a compost. So, and we've got 2 hop growers that are potentially interested as well. So like discussion.
We've also been in contact with a nursery that's involved in providing trees for our forestry operation. And so they're underway with doing some trials of our biochar at that location.
So what we've heard so far is Mike's been asking, obviously Mike would be the person that would, if we were to write a funding application, would be willing to do the trials, and he lives locally. And he's obviously independent, which is a good thing of something like this. if you're making funding applications. And we were just starting to talk about how the practicalities of how this product might work and the potential difficulties of balancing up the nutrients that are with it and the pH on a a large scale thing. So that's where we've got to. So I would definitely say, Dan and Ben, there's all sorts of complications in this, and this is why just a strip down the paddock amongst a bigger thing would be the way to start off to get a feel for how to do this. Is there practical ways that it could be incorporated into the soil?
Yeah, my feeling would be some form of, at the end of the crop life, maybe incorporating it as we're chopping the crop. We know from our researchers we've done, it's our highest risk of nitrate leaching.
Yes.
It's not actually the production process, it's the incorporation at the end.
That's a very good point.
Sorry, I'm really struggling to hear Dan's sound. Could you just repeat that, Annette? I couldn't hear it, sorry.
He said that if he was going to be doing it, he would look at incorporating it into the crop at the end of the crop cycle, knowing that the fallow period after the crop comes, you chop the organic matter of the leftover crop in with it. And because that's when the highest nitrate leaching occurs, and particularly I imagine in an autumn or winter type crop, that's the highest risk. So yeah, that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, Dan, do you try and get cover crops in late in the season, because that is your first line of defense for mopping up free nitrogen? Do you try and in some of your, how much of the operation would be totally fallow going through the winter like that? Sorry?
Very, very little of our operation would be bare.
Yeah.
The majority would be running into crop rotation.
I think for us as well, we don't really cover crop. We do it from time to time, maybe after an onion crop, but probably much like you, is it's get the crop out and get the next crop back in. It's too expensive to be putting cover crops in, so the land is too expensive. So you basically you're harvesting and then you're chopping it under. I think what we've discussed is probably the best thing, what we think is the best thing with anything like this. Like, we've tried sawdust in the past and haven't really seen any great results, but we figure you put it on before you plow, and then you plow, and then you're trying to create a layer of biochar below the surface that's going to capture any nitrogen. That's the thought process that we would think that you would use.
Guys, I've got a question for you. That it's clear that biochar captures ammonium better, and other soil scientists here chip in ammonium because it's a cation, possibly better than it does nitrate. Would that be a fair comment? And then do you guys use urea-based fertilizers or ammonium-based fertilizers?
No, very little.
It only stays in its ammonia form while it's cold. If it's warm, if you say urea, goes through ammonia to nitrates quite quickly. And when nitrogen is in ammonia form, it's actually resisting leaching anyway. So it's your nitrates that are the real issue.
Yeah.
Can I just perhaps just when you talk trials, to just go through the processes of how I would approach it, and the way I was thinking, you want to do a proper replicated trials. You don't want to do a strip. I wouldn't be interested in that, because it's very hard to prove it scientifically or to validate it. So my vision would be having plots, say, of biochar, maybe at one rate or at two rates, against untreated plots. And the plots would be, I don't know, thinking it through, probably about the size of a house, maybe a bit bigger. And so apply and replicated, maybe I'd have to work through this, the science of that, maybe 10 times. So you'd have 10 plots of untreated, you have 10 plots of rate 1, 10 plots of rate 2, all randomized. And then what you'd apply it to those plots and then georeference it, and then let the operation run through that area as it normally would. That was sort of my vision. And you can do things like penetrometer test. You can do visual soils assessment on each individual plot. You can do obviously soil testing, obviously whatever you want to do. There'd be georeference. You may not even have pigs in the ground. One of the interesting ways you can approach it is using the I call them suction cups, but you can put these cups into the soil at below rooting depth, at whatever depth you want, and you can draw a soil solution up from that zone. And we've done it a bit over in Marlborough, on some work over there. You could put one or two of those at each plot as well. So that would be giving you your nitrate sample. Now, those cups are not very good for trying to work out leaching because they don't give you absolute. They're not like the lysimeter devices they have at Lincoln, where they can measure the downward movement of all the nitrogen. These cups, you can only take a snapshot in time. So they don't tell you about total leaching, but what they're very good for in this situation is comparing between treatments or between plots. So you would do everything on the same day. And let's say, for example, if biochar there was 10% less nitrate on average in a difference between the untreated, this is a way you could pick that up. So it's not going to tell you total leaching, but it can tell you differences. That's sort of the thought process I've gone through as we've been talking about this project.
The only potential advantage, and this could be completely impractical, of doing a strip across the paddock would be that you could actually put a drain under it. You just run a drain under it and then measure the nitrate coming out the bottom of that drain. But yeah, but
you can do the same thing with the cups. And once again, it wouldn't stack up. You've got to have things properly designed and replicated and randomized. Otherwise, it's bad science. Basically, it's bad science to do just one strip. I
wouldn't do one. I would have done multiple strips. But yeah, I really like your idea.
Yeah.
I just thought from the point of view of a practical trial with the farm, much easier just to apply a whole strip of biochar rather than but presumably if you're doing it on plots, you'd be applying it by hand.
That's right.
Yeah.
The biggest problem I see, so I was visualizing, then all the operation would just go through normally, including, nutrients and lime. But now after the discussions we've just been having, if there's a potential liming effect of biochar, suddenly we're creating, you'd want to try and match. If you're going to have a liming effect of the biochar, you want to try and match that with the untreated plots of applying lime, for example. You'd want to, in all the plots, you try to match the same nutrient values. Otherwise, you're actually creating potentially other differences that could be nutrient related, not the physical effects or some of the chemical effects of the biochar. Do you see what I mean?
Can I comment? Yeah. Can I comment? I hear what you're saying and understand it. I think we're really dealing, dare I say it, with the product. And I think there is going to be quite a lot of high carbon boiler ash biochar produced in the future. So I think, like, for example, if you call it a product, which is a bit commercial for me, but that's the way it is, then it's the sum of the parts, the benefits of that product. So if you're trying to tease out the biochar portion, then I think that's fine, but it really is a straight out biochar experiment. You'd need to try and get rid of the ash, more's the point, because well, anyway, I think you probably understand what I'm trying to say there. On a practical way, though, I like the idea of your replicated design, but from a practical way, perhaps those plots and it doesn't always work, I understand this, but maybe if they were the whole strip of the width of whatever block or piece of land, that might be easier to manage from a farming point of view or a growing point of view.
If you chop that up and call them individual replicates, it's not, Dennis. That's called pseudo replication.
Right.
Anyway, we can discuss that. To me, it comes back to your original. You've got to set objectives for the trial, and one key what's started a lot of the talk around this is the nitrate leaching in the Waimea Plains. And I mean, if that was just your one objective, is what are the effects of this product? Does it help us manage nitrate leaching? And then the other nutrient ones that I was talking about sort of go into the background. It might be, if that's just the key driver of the trial, then these other ones go back, other potential issues go into the background of it.
I'm always
how you manage it.
I'm always looking for win-win advantages for the farmer and the environment as well, which doesn't necessarily sit well with science. But if there are nutrients and that reduces the cost and it improves the water holding capacity of the soil, so less irrigation's needed, and it reduces nitrate leaching, and presumably if it reduces nitrate leaching, it increases the amount of nitrogen that's available for the crop. Then if you can marry all that together and have a reduced nitrate leaching, but the farmer's also better off, that's the best outcome.
Oh, the water one is huge too in it. Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing you can do. You could put, we have a lot to do with high-tech soil moisture monitoring gear. It's all the gear you can put on the ground. You put a probe in each plot, or one or two probes in each plot for soil moisture monitoring. But as soon as you start putting permanent gear on the plot, it's harder for the commercial operation to function. We have to then protect that equipment. So I don't know how we get around that, but to get the data, it's sort of important. Or whether you just go in a certain time of the year and install that equipment for so many months and then take it out.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, that's a prohibitive part for us to be using those tools. We're not currently using like the Syntec probes I was using in the nursery because we are such a short rotation crop. But we may have some options leading into winter. Some 6-month crops. Where we might get some valuable data out of that once those probes have had time to settle.
Yeah.
Another option we do have a plot that has a network of lysimeters already installed, left over from a previous study.
Did you say lysimeter?
Yeah.
We've all gone, yeehaw! How big a plot?
It's about a quarter of a hectare.
How many lysimeters?
I think there's about 30.
Really? That's a big. Is that Lincoln or someone involved in that?
It's through Ravensdown.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'd have to check the exact specs with Pierre because it's all before my time. But
are they still collecting data from them?
No, we've just come to the end of the trial funding last season, and we've tried to renew the funding, and it's been rejected. So we're looking for a new project. Yeah.
Man, that would be perfect. That's quite a
I mean,
Mike.
you could you could use those plots. How far apart are the lysimeters, Dan?
They would be. I know there are sections that are about 50 meters apart.
Yeah.
I don't know how many lysimeters are in each section.
And do you just crop that like normal?
Yes.
Wow.
What have you learnt?
Well, I know the trial originally was for with testing nitrate reducing additives and fertilizer.
Oh yeah.
And the results were that there were no significant reductions in the nitrate additives compared to our standard program. That was for Ravensdown Intech fertilizers.
You might like to send us the contact details of the person that owns them.
We own them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's even better.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty exciting. So what sort of things, Ben and Dan, would you, like, you've heard Mike's ideas. So you've heard the complications with the nutrients, we've heard the complications with the liming, and obviously the ash and the biochar. Have you had thoughts that have come up from that?
Yeah, I was just thinking, we know there is value to the nitrate, to the nutrient that we'll be adding. I think that we'll probably have a longer term flow into our nutrient budgeting. I don't think we would subtract that equivalent from our fertilizer program in the short term. But it's definitely something we can monitor through our annual soil testing program. If we start to see it might have a longer term effect when we can start reducing fertilizers. But I think that cost saving immediately wouldn't be a huge priority for us. We'd definitely be focused on the other benefits. For us, definitely try and increase that soil carbon. And any long-term increase in CEC in the soil would be a benefit for us. Now, we know we're farming on very light soils in this region with its challenges.
Do you know the name of your soil type?
Yeah, which one?
Where the lysimeters are?
They're in Ranzau soil.
Oh, that's even better.
Yeah.
Perfect. So that's where most of the nitrate leaching's coming, is from those Ranzau soils. And
yeah, we specifically chosen to be in there.
Biochar, and the stuff that I've read, is most likely to give benefit on those really light soils.
That's great.
Yeah. Ben, what are you on?
God, we're all over the place as well. I, to be honest, don't know the name of it, but some of our blocks will be on the Ranzau soils as well. We got blocks out Waimea West. We got blocks right up by the mouth to the gorge. So yeah, we got blocks everywhere. But I think much like yours, I mean, obviously we want to see the benefit to reduce nitrate leaching, but from a business standpoint as well, if it can reduce our fertilizer inputs, then that's something that we're definitely keen to look at going forward. But yeah, I guess there's a lot of water to go under the bridge before we start tipping money and whatnot into it to prove that it actually works, which is, I guess, why we're all here today. But I guess what we've spoken about is, the rates we're talking about are really low rates, and is there any benefit? I mean, you're talking about a ton or 2 tons per hectare per year going forward. Can you put a 5 to 10 tons on initially and then go a ton per hectare going forward? We just we're finding it hard to get our head around the 1 ton per hectare. You get a good gust of wind and it'll blow it away. Like it's not really a lot, is it?
Dennis, you're talking, but you're muted.
Dennis, you're muted.
Sorry, I've got a little dog in the back of the car and it's bouncing around a little bit. Yeah, I think if you were interested, the rate you could start it. You could put your 10 tons on. I'd be concerned about the amount of nutrient going on, but I've heard anecdotal reports that things go well, but I have it's not really in the science to say that would be a good thing to do from the point of view of the nutrients. But if you've got an area that you want to, it's not science, but you could do a strip with that. I really go with what Mike says, is that if you want sort of reliable information to put across the district, you need to do it in a scientific way. But if you've got a private interest in certain things, I don't see why you can't do it any way you choose.
Philip,
Can I just add
Go.
very briefly? Here's the example around doing things where you might say practically as opposed to proper replication and proper science. If you were to spray one paddock with glyphosate and it killed all the weeds, and the other paddock you left sprayed, it's obvious it had an effect. But when you're looking sometimes for 5 or 10% difference in a treatment, you cannot do that by just going, we're going to do this part of the block and we're not going to treat the other part. It just, you cannot, you see what I mean? That's when you're looking for those sorts of differences, you have to do the proper replicated trials. And yeah, it's all around variation. You get a huge amount of variation and I could go on for hours about this of sort of variation that affects trials, but yeah, it's absolutely critical that you design it properly. Yeah.
And I think it would be fair to say that while there's been quite a bit of overseas research on biochar, there's been very little in New Zealand. It's mainly been focused at that supply chain of how to produce it. That's what Massey's program's been. Nobody's been done working out the actual benefits in the soil. So I think it would be really worthwhile to do it properly, for sure.
I agree. And I agree with Mike as well, but I've had the benefit of working with Soil Pro, the company Soil Pro, that's been putting this material out around Pukekohe, among other places. And dare I say, some of it has actually found its way into the sports fields, one of the sports fields at Blenheim. So it's making its way closer all the time. But that material and how the farmers, and these are 600-700 hectares of onions and potatoes and various other things. They have sort of, I think they've done sort of their own kind of trial work, but they're not fools, as you can well imagine, and they are definitely behind this concept, particularly in that district because they're under the hammer for nutrients and other things, and silt, all sorts of things. They're under the hammer, as you might say, and they are going for this stuff. The material they're using up there is 55% carbon as compared to Nelson Pines at 33. And so that would be the difference. And so, yeah, that's the background. But I hear Mike's comment and agree as well, particularly if you're wanting to use that information across the district.
I mean, I think that, and Ben and Dan can correct me if I'm wrong, but the future on the Waimea Plains, if we don't solve this leaching problem, is going to be massive restrictions on the growers on what they can do, and particularly on those Ramsar soils. And so if we can kind of find up a solution for the nitrate leaching, which we are not going to be able to do without proper replicated measurements, because it's not like you can try it and, oh yeah, it all looks good and the crop's growing fine, so it's all good. We actually have to have some measurements from under the soil to see. I mean, you could still use it if it's for other reasons, but I think it would be quite important to work out whether it actually has an impact on nitrate leaching. And it may not, but you may find that, there's some value in the nutrient things, and it may increase the water holding capacity. And I find it difficult to believe that you could increase the water holding capacity and not reduce nitrate leaching, because that's a key component of nitrate leaching, is the drainage out the bottom. So, but, if we were going to say, to the council, we put on 2 tonne of biochar each year for 4 years, and we know from our trials that will reduce nitrate leaching by X%, then that helps a lot, I think, anyway.
Yeah, I do like the idea of having larger plots too, that you can still come back, say the project is all over in 3 years' time or whatever, that you can still come back in 5 years' time and make measurements, or 10 years' time.
Yeah, because the stuff sticks around.
Yeah.
Yes, that's really a crucial and interesting point, because yeah, technically it's going to be there for largely ever. It's only if the whole soil base was eroded, it'll be there. Simple.
Was it half a hectare or quarter of a hectare? Dan?
Quarter of a hectare.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Looking at, I guess, land area and volume of product, I mean, how much biochar and ash product is there to, you know, available? What kind of volume are you guys working to?
From boiler ash we've got, it's probably about 200 cube a month roughly.
And do you know the bulk density of that? Because I made an assumption. I calculated this out.
Yeah, not at this stage.
No.
The more carbon it's got, the lower the bulk density usually. So
Yes.
Yeah. So if I just arbitrarily picked at 0.5 tonne per metre cubed, but next time you put it on a truck, work out its bulk density. And
that's easy to do. We just put it across the scales.
yes, yeah, very easy to do. So that's a lot.
I think it's going to be higher bulk density than 0.5.
Yeah, I would think so, because that was the average bulk density of biochar, so it'll be a lot more. Yeah. So yeah, 200 metre cubed of 0.5 per metre cubed is 100 tonne, and it's probably more than that.
So the bulk density, it depends on what you're trying to count. If you're trying to count the weight of carbon, then yeah, I would imagine it's going to be.
I'm assuming
less than
the biochar component is coarser than the ash component.
Oh, it's kind of a mixture.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not feasible to filter it, sieve it into different components.
It wind sifts on the heap to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So-
Hey, Dan and Ben, I just want to point out that very fine ash or carbon is a health and safety risk. I mean, I don't know if it's any worse than lime or anything like that, but it is very dusty, and you'd have to be, I would say, putting it into the soil would be a better thing than leaving it on the top.
Yeah, another benefit, I guess, if it's incorporated with the crop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just on that rock,
usually it's got a certain amount of moisture as a management tool for moving it around and dealing with it. But you can take that into the equation.
We had a brief conversation before, Dennis, about potential heavy metals or, you know, contaminants. Do you want to cover that?
Yes, well, as far as I've had a number of analyses done by Verum Laboratories, and the values are all down at sort of, you know, below what might be certifiable for organics. So there's no problem with the heavy metals. To go to the other part of this equation, which is they talk about polyaromatic hydrocarbons in biochars. I don't expect that to be a consideration, but I haven't had that analysis done yet.
And obviously, if we were doing plot studies, we'd measure the full raft of minerals and
Yes,
micronutrients and things. So we
Yeah.
picked that up too.
And from a percentage point of view, the mere fact that there's a higher ash content than those the polyaromatic hydrocarbons are likely to be diluted. They're a strange thing. They're already in the soil anyway, or in organic-y soils. It's only and they can be used as a plant stimulant, but of course that equally applies at too high a rate, it becomes toxic.
So there's 50 plots at 50 square meters.
Oh, yep.
So we've got 2,500 square meters, and if there's 50 lysimeters.
I don't quote me on that, but I'll find the details of that research program. I'll get it off here and give more detail.
It would be also interesting to know whether there was actually any significant effects, like whether there's a hangover of any trial plots that would be on it. But I guess the next question is, are we sufficiently interested in this to see whether we have a discussion with either MPI or AgMart about doing some plot studies like this? And I guess Philip, with Nelson Pine be up for putting in some co-funding?
Yeah, I think that's possible. It depends on what the magnitude of that funding is. We're already funding some other research at the moment on the other component of our ash from the boilers, what we call the clinker. So we've got Callaghan doing some research on that for inclusion in concrete.
The beauty, I believe, as was sort of referred to before, of setting this up is that it's there sort of forever. And if there's no funding comes, you can do some minor kind of assessments. And if funding does come, you can be more involved in your assessments because the actual cost of laying it down is probably quite minimal.
Yeah, Mike, if you could get access to these lysimeters, and I know I'm about to ask a question about how long a piece of string is, but do you have any sort of ballpark idea of how much it might cost for you to run a trial?
A proper replicated trial, if we haven't got, depends what, pretty much annually it would be, for us, it would be anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000. It depends how much equipment, basically.
Yep.
To actually, I can do you a randomized plan. If you don't get funding, if just to get it something in the ground, I can do a randomized plan for takes me an hour.
So,
of those lysimeters, if you were to treat, if that became your trial area. So it's not, as Dennis said, it's not something, if you wanted to just get something up and running, it's not hard to do that. But it's when you start using lab time, putting soil moisture monitors in, that's when the costs get up.
And of course, I would be throwing in a yield of the vegetables that were growing on those plots as well. I mean, wouldn't you want to know?
There's all sorts of things. Yeah. Those probes, to put one in each plot, for example, just the hardware's, I think, we have other staff that do this. I think it's like you can get probes that don't just sense, soil moisture. They'll actually sense the ion level at every 10 centimeters as well, total ions. Those are about $4,000 a pop, each unit, but then it's beaming it up to the internet. It's all real time. It's really good gear. But this times that by 30 plots or 50 plots, the thing gets incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And you'd actually want to do it to per plot to be, once again, to be have really valid information that that's that you can rely on. But I've got to say, environmental, water management, nutrient management, this is a wave coming towards us. I mean, this is the sort of thing that should get funding.
Yeah, I mean, so let's say, how many years would we do this over, you reckon?
Dennis?
3 to 5.
So if
I
we
mean,
go,
longer, it'll go on longer, but anyway, just as a matter of course, and you could stop measuring anything for as long as it's treated similarly, and measure it again in 10 years' time. But you need 3 to 5 years, I believe.
And you look at it, you also need to get the council on board with the soil scientist. You've got growers, you've got byproducts from industry, you've got you've got yourself, you've got us, you've got council involved. I mean, it's a pretty powerful group to be involved, I think. How much did the council want to be involved in it? Did they?
well, I think Anne would definitely, and they might put some contribution towards it, but Anne might put her time in. So she's a soil scientist.
Yeah.
And obviously, the growers are putting some in kind, and if however many lysimeters, they're quite expensive. That's a massive in kind contribution. So if we were looking at sort of $30,000 for 3 years, well, let's just go 100,000. Then
it could be more than that, and it depends. Once again, it depends on these soil moisture monitors. You could do 30 grand's worth of soil moisture monitors just like that.
Could you actually you can actually go and measure the soil moisture though in all the plots at, say, 4 or 5 times a year rather than having one set up continually, and maybe you have to
I know a fair bit about it, but I would actually talk to other staff. That could actually be just as expensive, because you can actually put tubes in the ground and do that. Yeah, but you need staff doing that, and that gets pretty expensive too. As the thing with soil moisture monitoring continuous is you can actually have that continuous values, where if every week you're losing 5 or 10% less water, that accumulates over time. You can't do that unless you're doing continuous monitoring. You can't get that data. So your cumulative benefit over 3 months can be quite large of water saving. 5% might not sound much. And have to get your head around, because you won't be irrigating all these plots differently, so they would still get the same. So you have to think about how you're going to calculate that. Yeah, there's a lot to get your head around. I think there's a lot to get your head around, but I mean, it'll be a very interesting project. I mean, it'd be a very good one for, it's environmental. It's I would think it would get MPI funding in that. We did a trial last year on soil texture around irrigation nutrients and apples. We got 6-month funding from our Land and Water. That was we got $50,000 just to test a novel idea. Unfortunately, that only runs now. They've changed it. They'll only give you 1-year funding, but there's funding there for environmental stuff. It's
I've got a couple of MPI people informed of what we're doing, and I think they would help. They also, the Sustainable Farming Fund has just introduced a great thing that they have a manager, and they allocate you a manager, and you can say, well, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And they'll say, well, this doesn't fit at all, or yes, go ahead and put an application in. So that's very helpful, because it increases, it doesn't waste as much time. And yeah, a key component of this would be to wrapping, people like Dan and Ben, a really good community group of interest of farmers and landowners that are interested in it and having inputs, and making sure that whatever's trialed is actually practical in a real sense and things like that, but also showing that they're interested, that it's relevant. It's not just.
Oh, that's absolutely key. And that's what I was trying to communicate before. I mean, you've got a very good group right here and now. Yeah, I would, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's all possible. It's just whether Dan and Ben, you think it's a good idea, and obviously it might be, we could actually do a bit of Dennis's ideas and Mike's combined. So on Dan's place, we do the highly replicated trial, and on Ben's one, we do something that's a little bit, just trialing the practicalities of it, and having a go with it and seeing, are there any issues on it, coming back to the whole strip thing. But and I would also be very keen to involve Don, and from the mycorrhizal point of view of the fungi and things that we're getting in the soils and difference like that, and potentially this mycodont, composting it. Dan and Ben, does all your organic waste go back into this, cut back into the soil, or do you have stuff that could be composted?
Yeah, it's all currently turned back into the soil.
Yeah.
My experience in viticulture, we had a 150 cubic metre compost system per season, and that was purely to get rid of winery waste.
Yep.
I know councils are getting very strict on compost systems. Used to be able to just throw a pile on a piece of land somewhere and call it a compost, but now councils are looking for funded concrete pads, rainwater catchment.
So that component could come through via the hop growers, because obviously they have a lot of stuff to compost, and it's a little bit more pleasant than the the vineyard.
I think even in the future, those hop growers are probably going to come up with some compliance challenges. Coming out of what we've seen in the grape industry. The other inputs required once you start carting bulk amounts of product off-site for composting. We're talking 20 to 30 tonne per hectare of material. Compost systems are very high maintenance. You need a machine pretty much full time turning weekly for it to be efficient. Then you're reapplying it, so you're burning a hell of a lot of diesel to make a nice product.
Yeah.
We don't typically get a lot of material. We might get 10 cubes a week of green waste, but what we do get quite a lot of is onion waste. So this year I'd only be guessing that we may have done about 100 tonne of onions to waste, which is fed out to animals and whatnot. So there's a lot of onions in that do end up going to waste from our business.
Oh, well, that's another good component of it. Here's more of a greeny question. Are you guys interested in trying to make your businesses carbon neutral? So if you, for instance, if you did start accumulating up to 10 tonne of biochar into your soils and it was useful, would that be helpful? Would you be interested in looking at your carbon footprint and getting your products a bit more carbon neutral? Is that something you're thinking about?
From our point of view, it's probably not a driver at this point in time. But yeah, I guess everything's on the table going forward.
Yeah, just a lot of that seems to be led by the Kyoto Protocol, and I don't think there's any recognition of soil carbon yet.
No.
But definitely there's big focus in our business of our carbon inputs, particularly in the glasshouse production. We're going through a massive conversion to wood-fired boilers that's currently underway. So we'll actually, at some point, we'll have our own production of ash and biochar.
Yeah.
If you're running your furnaces efficiently, you shouldn't have any biochar. That's our problem.
Or ash.
I can agree with that in terms of making investigations around the South Island. I don't know whether you call it efficiently, but certainly new boilers tend to be down at 1 or 2% carbon, or probably might even be lower. But there is definitely voluntary carbon markets that are concentrating on biochar. So they're going to find their space without a doubt. And the beauty about biochar, sorry, is that you can, the tests are there. You can weigh it, you can have it tested, and it's like 87% stable, 80% stable. And then you just have a weight. You've applied 0.8 of a kilo of stable carbon that'll be there for over 100 years. And that carries a value. There's no, you don't actually have to measure the soil because of the difficulties of accuracy around, or to the point of getting at 1 or 2% in the soil. That's been the difficulty. I think it's improving. I know that in Europe, there's 1 or 2 businesses where they're actually GPSing sites and going back and testing those GPS sites for the purpose of measuring any changes in organic matter. But in that case, they not only pay out for an increase in carbon, but there is a cost if you lose carbon.
Yeah,
But
some of those components we haven't signed up for, but other countries have. So,
but it's coming. I'm certain it's coming.
That's side of the discussion. Probably more for our accounts team and for our production team.
yeah. So how are we feeling about this? Are we feeling like this is something that we should have a crack at?
I guess we need to discuss within our business whether this is a kind of long-term viability. I guess this product's going to have a value if we do apply it long term. Have you got any idea of the cost, say per tonne or per cubic metre in the future?
What you're saying for the Nelson Pine material?
Yeah.
Well, based on what the current price for the growers up north is, it's probably worth around $100 to $150 for the carbon. But I think there's going to be pressure on that price, although it won't be like biochar generally has a figure of about 450 when you put all the cartage and everything else on it. So, but it's going out. Like there's increasing purchases up north, and at the moment there's about 5,000 tonnes going out this year to growers, sports fields, kiwi fruit growers, veggies. So it's likely to sit around $450. But in the case of Nelson Pines, I've got a figure of $100 a cubic metre in mind, and I think that's kind of a bargain for the carbon. But while no one, while it's not knowing how well it's going to, contribute to your economy, I can understand you being cautious.
Yeah,
and then
we need to sit down and get a rough ballpark of, say if we do apply 5 tonne per hectare. If we had a little sports paddock, it wouldn't be too bad, but with 300 hectare of production, that cost adds up.
Yep.
So we just run through a rough exercise and see what kind of cost to the businesses would be. Yeah,
and the chance, based on other experience, and it's only anecdotal, as you're aware, but you'd certainly recoup that value. But that's the $64 question at the moment. And I think this is great if we can get some demos and other use of it around the district, particularly if it's got, good comparisons and certain, some of them are done in a scientific way that you have confidence to use that information across the community, that's great. But equally, every individual farmer knows his land as a rule, and you'll know whether you're getting a benefit or not. Right. And yeah, that's how it works.
But yeah, definitely that would have to be part of the trial, and that's why it's practically a good dynamic for my mind anyway, to have a nice replicated trial on one property and a more practical one, like how much does it cost to put this on, and you know, how would you put it on practically, and things like that. That could be a good
Case study.
yeah, good case study, you know, looking at the practical sides and the actual science as well.
Yep.
And of course,
I
I'm
agree.
assuming that Tasman, so Nelson Pines would be contributing the biochar for these trials at no cost. That would be an in-kind contribution, and they might, depending on how the trial goes, might put some cash into it as well for some of the measurements. Normally it's 10 to 22% contribution, but some of that can be in kind as well, of the overall cost. But that would be something that would be depend on the funding application that you went to. So it's where do we go from here, really?
Well, I think it's definitely worthwhile. Obviously, I've got a vested interest in it, but either way, I intend to, you know, I just believe in it, and that's going forward. I suspect my phone's gone flat.
Not yet.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, if there's funding on board, we're keen to give it a crack, and if it is beneficial, then it can only help. But yeah, from a trial point of view, yeah, we're on board with it, I guess.
Yep, and Dan, obviously you're going to have to talk to Pierre, and so Pierre was coming to this meeting, but he couldn't, and he sent Dan, who he figured was going to be very knowledgeable on the subject, and he has been.
Yeah, well, I've actually been pushing him to get us some biochar. So
We're talking to the converted here.
we definitely keen to try something, whether it's a full-blown funded trial or whether it's just a production level trial at a lower level. Just as a comparison, you know, we're looking at cover cropping systems, and you know, there's quite an expense to managing even just a cover crop across a hectare. So for us to look at another system that might provide more benefits, definitely keen.
Yep. So if you can, I think everybody can just go off and think about it. I will, if it's okay with you, I might. Okay. Does anyone object to me forwarding this recording to other people that might be interested?
No problem.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, and MPI, there's a lady in MPI who is in charge of trying to get biochar being used in New Zealand. I'd like to send this to her as well. I might even just take notes of it, but is it okay that I talk to them and just see where we go from there? And I might, Dennis strongly suggested that we look at AgMart and Sustainable Farming Fund. I'll find a bit more about what might be involved. And yeah, if Dan and Ben, if you can talk to your organisations and just make sure that, you know, what you could be interested in, get back to us. And I will try and get a couple of hop growers on board too, which might look at it from the incorporation of compost, because they have to make compost anyway. That role of it. And I know, well,
we have previously approached hop growers in relation to that, and been a sort of a lukewarm interest. They've been kind of interested, and then not much has happened.
I think the issue is with Dan and Ben, you know, you can't really invest a whole lot of money into it unless you're sure, A, that it's going to be beneficial, and B, it's not going to do any harm. And so having, you know, smaller plots where you can assess that before you put your business at risk is a much better approach to go. But I think Richard Davies has already agreed, hasn't he, from Northwood Hops? He's interested, Dennis.
Yes, he has. I recently spoke to him and asked him if he was wanting to get involved in experimenting with it. And having spoken to Dion and Don, and he's indicated that he is interested. I'm not sure how much further. He asked for a copy of the analyses and I sent it through to him.
I've rung him, and he was just shifting house today, so he sends him his apologies. But yes, he was definitely coming to this meeting. And there's a guy called Julian Rain there who I've had a brief conversation with, very brief. But he's would be a very good person to get involved by the hop industry too. So he was in a board meeting today, so he couldn't come. So yeah, so I think if we had a couple of vegetable growers and a couple of hop growers, obviously it's a potential use for it in orchards, but that's a little bit trickier. And I think most of the benefits would be, the vegetable growers are the ones that we really need to find a solution for, really, if we can. Yeah. So it's great. I'll make some notes. I'll share this video in case you want to share it with other people. And yeah, we'll see. And I'll find out some more information and we can all go back and think about it. And Mike, if it's okay, if you can sort of, Dan, if you can find out about the lysimeters, we can't do anything until we know what sort of trial that we might be having, whether those lysimeters are available and could be used. Then once we know that, we could actually just do a bit of a draft out, brief draft out of what the trial was, which would be sufficient to take to MPI to have a conversation about what we were thinking. So any other comments? Seeing it's almost beer o'clock on a Friday afternoon.
I've got to go and pick up a car that's been serviced before
Yeah.
they lock up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Annette.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good Christmas, everybody.
Yep. And
Yeah, you too.
an apology has just popped up on my screen from Don Greaves. He was planning on coming and he just didn't make it. I haven't read the excuse, but yes, he's sending an apology. So I think having somebody who it's really good on the fungi side of it and what happens in the soil, because that's supposed to be a good advantage of the biochar, would be a good component to the trial.
Yep, no, I'd agree. Have Don involved.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Thanks, Annette.
Thank you.
Bye.